What if the answer was right there the whole time? What if the clues were sitting on the table, in the texts, on the camera, and the people who were supposed to find them just missed it? Or worse, ignored it? Tonight, we are going case by case through 10 of the most talked about true crime trials of 2026. 10 cases where investigators, juries, and entire systems got blindsided. Some of these people waited years for justice, some are still waiting, and a few killers walked free long after they should have been caged. I need you to stay with me through all 10, because the further down this list we go, the worse the failures get. By the time we hit number 10, you are going to ask yourself how an entire police department looked a killer in the eye for 13 years and saw nothing. This is Last Witness. The camera sees everything. Let's get into it. Case 1, Paul Caneiro, the Colts Neck Mansion Inferno. It is 4 in the morning. A quiet, upscale neighborhood in Colts Neck, New Jersey. Everyone is asleep, and Paul Caneiro is standing in his brother's driveway with gasoline in his hands. Michael Caneiro had everything. The Colts Neck Mansion, the successful business, the wife, the kids, the life that Paul believed should have been his too. The two brothers ran a pest control company together, and the money had become a war. Paul was bleeding cash, debt eating him alive. His brother, in his mind, had taken everything. So Paul made a decision that no amount of debt should ever lead a person to. He drove to that mansion before the sun came up. He poured accelerant through the garage. He lit the match, and he drove home. Inside that house, his brother's wife, Jennifer, and their 2 teenage daughters, Sophia and Jessie, died in the flames. Michael managed to escape burned, barely alive, only to be shot in the chest by Paul waiting outside. 5 people targeted in one night. But here is where it gets maddening. Paul went back to his own home, set fire to his own cars, and called 911, screaming that someone had attacked his family too. Bandaged hands, tears, panic. And police initially chased a phantom, a mystery attacker who never existed. His hands were burned from pouring accelerant. Gasoline was found on his tires. Neighbors reported 2 explosion sites. His bank records showed catastrophic debt tied directly to Michael's business accounts. All of it was there, day 1. Yet it took weeks before investigators stopped chasing ghost intruders and looked at the man crying in front of them. Paul Caneiro was convicted. He will die in prison. But 5 people, 2 of them teenagers asleep in their beds, paid the price for a debt dispute that should have ended with a lawsuit, not a funeral. Question: what if police had pulled his bank records on day 1 instead of week 3? Case 2, Kouri Richins, the grieving widow who wrote the book. She sat across from media cameras with tears running down her face. A Utah mother, recently widowed, and she had just published a children's book about grief dedicated to helping kids understand loss after her husband Eric died suddenly. What Kouri Richins did not mention was that she put enough fentanyl in his Moscow Mule cocktail to kill 5 grown men. The 4th of March, 2022. Eric Richins drinks the cocktail Kouri made him. He goes to bed. He never wakes up. Kouri calls 911, says he is not breathing. Medical examiners initially list the cause as a possible accidental overdose because fentanyl was found in his system. And in 2022, accidental fentanyl deaths were not uncommon. But then investigators started digging. Her search history, fentanyl lethal doses, her texts to a black market dealer, her purchase of opioids weeks before Eric's death. And perhaps most damning, Eric had recently changed his life insurance policy. Kouri stood to collect $1.8 million. She published the grief book while under investigation. She did interviews. She leaned into the mourning mother narrative so hard that it nearly worked. Her defense team called it a household drug environment Eric used recreationally. Maybe this was self-inflicted. But the dealer testified, the texts were recovered, and the prosecution pointed to not 1 but 3 prior incidents where guests at Kouri's parties had overdosed on substances nobody could fully account for. She is now facing the death penalty. The 2026 trial has produced explosive daily testimony, and that children's book, her attempt to paint herself as a devoted, heartbroken wife, was entered into evidence as proof of premeditated image management. If Kouri built her cover through public sympathy, our next case shows what happens when a killer uses silence as his weapon. Case 3, Larry Millete, no body, no problem. Maya Millete was 39 years old, a mother of 3, a woman who, according to her sisters, had finally found her courage. She was going to leave her husband Larry. She had told family members. She had started the paperwork. On the 7th of January 2021, Maya disappeared. Larry Millete held press conferences. He launched social media searches. He stood at podiums with photos of his wife and begged for tips. And for months, police treated him with the careful deference given to grieving spouses. But Maya's family never believed him. Her sisters spoke loudly and consistently. Larry was controlling, obsessive, and had been sending Maya increasingly threatening messages in the weeks before she vanished. Text messages recovered later showed a pattern of rage, demands that she wear specific clothing, threats when she refused, and finally, messages that read like a countdown. His browser history showed searches for body disposal. His phone pinged near remote desert locations. A jailhouse call captured him murmuring about flowers for Maya in a way that made prosecutors' skin crawl. Maya's body has never been found, and that was Larry's strategy. No body meant no crime scene. No crime scene meant reasonable doubt. He believed it would protect him. It did not. In 2026, a jury convicted Larry Millete of first-degree murder on purely circumstantial evidence. The texts, the searches, the pings, and the absolute impossibility of Maya simply vanishing into nothing. He was sentenced to 25 years to life. Maya's children will grow up without either parent, and her body is still out there somewhere in the California desert, waiting. Larry used silence. Our next case used influencer culture as armor, and it almost worked. Case 4, Courtney Clenney. When followers become defenders. The 3rd of April, 2022. Miami luxury high-rise. OnlyFans model Courtney Clenney calls 911, screaming that her boyfriend Christian Obumseli attacked her. Christian is on the floor with a kitchen knife buried in his chest. He bleeds out before paramedics arrive. Within 48 hours, Courtney's followers rallied. The hashtag #FreeCourtney spread across social media. Supporters argued she had been a victim of domestic violence and acted in self-defense. Her platform gave her a built-in army of defenders, and police initially accepted her account. But hotel surveillance footage told a different story. Security cameras from the complex's lobby area captured Courtney chasing Christian, not the other way around. Forensic analysis of the stab wound showed the trajectory was consistent with an overhead, forceful throw, not a defensive struggle. And text messages between the two revealed a relationship defined by Courtney's explosive rages and Christian's desperate attempts to de-escalate. Days before his death, building staff had called police to separate the couple. No arrest was made. Christian had begged friends to help him leave the relationship. He was scared. And when he finally tried to leave for good, the argument that followed ended with a knife. The 2026 trial produced a hung jury. A retrial is now scheduled. Courtney's defense continues to push the battered woman narrative. The prosecution points to the throw, the chase footage, and a pattern of calculated violence. Christian's family watches all of it from the gallery. Social media gave Courtney a shield. Our next case shows what happens when a killer's face is literally caught on camera, and it still takes years. Case 5, Richard Allen and the Delphi Bridge. The 13th of February 2017, two teenage girls, Abigail Williams, 13, and Liberty German, 14, hike a trail near an old railroad bridge in Delphi, Indiana. Libby films a man walking toward them on the bridge. You can hear her voice, just 2 words captured on audio. Down the hill, their bodies are found the next day, both murdered. For over 5 years, police could not make an arrest. The audio clip was public. The image of the suspect was public. More than 60,000 tips flooded in. Investigators chased pedo rings, satanic cults, and dozens of false leads. The case became a rabbit hole of theories that consumed online communities for nearly a decade. Richard Allen lived minutes from the bridge. He had walked that trail. A rare .40 caliber bullet casing found at the scene matched his weapon. His behavior after the girls disappeared was noted by neighbors as strange. He was hiding in plain sight while investigators looked everywhere else. Arrested in 2022, trial dragged into 2026 with explosive hearings, defense teams arguing contaminated evidence, genetic genealogy, overreach, and occult third-party suspects. The jury deliberated for 20 days. Guilty, life in prison. Abigail and Liberty's families sat in that courtroom for 9 years of hearings. 9 years. For a man who lived down the road, the Delphi case showed how long a killer can hide when there are too many theories. But our next case shows what happens when a killer hides behind God. Case 6, Lori Vallow, Doomsday Mother. Lori Vallow did not look like a murderer. She looked like a devoted mother who had found her faith. She and her new husband, Chad Daybell, preached about end times, light beings, and spiritual warfare. And when her children JJ, 7, and Tylee, 16, stopped appearing in public, Lori told anyone who asked that they were fine. They were not fine. JJ was suffocated and buried in a sealed black bag on Chad Daybell's property. Tylee was dismembered, placed in buckets, and burned in a makeshift pit in the backyard. Welfare checks were requested by extended family as early as September 2019. Officers visited Lori's home. She told them the children were with other family members. They left. Nobody verified. Nobody followed up with urgency. Months passed. It was not until January 2024, months later, that investigators returned with force. By then, Lori and Chad had married in Hawaii. The children had been in the ground since fall. Lori's texts to Chad during the period of the murders include messages about her children being zombies, a belief system they held that certain people's souls had been corrupted. They convinced themselves, or at least pretended to, that the murders were spiritually justified. Lori was convicted and sentenced to life. Chad Daybell faces the death penalty in ongoing proceedings. The 2026 appeals have been crushed, and the question everyone asks is the same. What if the officers who knocked on that door in September had simply said, "Show me the children right now"? Lori used religion as cover. Our next case used the internet itself. Case 7, Gabby Petito, the body language of a system failing. The Moab, Utah body cam footage should be studied in every police training academy in America. Two officers pull over a van. Inside, a young couple, Gabby Petito and Bryan Laundrie, are visibly distressed. Gabby is crying, shaking, describing an argument. She says she hit Bryan. Bryan confirms it. The officers separate them briefly, then send them on their way because Gabby took the blame. 6 weeks later, Gabby's body was found in a Wyoming campsite. Bryan had returned home to Florida without her, hired a lawyer, and disappeared into the Appalachian wilderness, where he eventually died by suicide, leaving a confession note admitting he killed Gabby. The Moab stop was a moment where the entire outcome could have changed. Officers noted Bryan had scratches on his face. Gabby had redness and bruising. Instead of treating this as a domestic violence situation with a potential victim, they negotiated a cooling-off arrangement and let both parties go. Gabby's family sued the Moab Police Department. The case prompted national conversations about how law enforcement handles domestic violence calls when the woman minimizes the abuse. The 2026 civil proceedings produced damning internal documents showing officers had noted concerns in their reports that were never acted on. Bryan Laundrie killed Gabby somewhere between that body cam stop and the day her family reported her missing. Every day between those two moments was time the system had and did not use. Case 8, Karen Reed, the framing allegation that shook Boston. The 29th of January, 2022. Canton, Massachusetts. Karen Reed calls police screaming. Her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, is unconscious in the snow outside a house party. He has head trauma. He dies. Police quickly focused on Karen. Her SUV's taillight was shattered. They theorized she had backed over John in a drunken rage after a fight. She was charged with second-degree murder, but Karen's defense team built a counter-narrative that exploded into national coverage. They argued John was beaten inside the house by off-duty officers at the party, and his body was placed in the snow to frame Karen. A snowplow driver testified the body was not there when he passed. Digital forensic experts contested the taillight evidence. Federal investigators opened a separate corruption probe into Canton law enforcement. The 2026 trial ended in a hung jury. A mistrial was declared. Retrial is pending. And the case has divided Massachusetts so deeply that Karen Reed has become a cause for thousands of supporters who believe she is innocent and a name that exposes systemic corruption in law enforcement. Whether she is guilty or framed, one thing is clear. The investigation was compromised from the start, and John O'Keefe's family still does not have an unchallenged answer. Case 9, Bryan Kohberger, the PhD, and the knife sheath. 4 college students, 1 rental house in Moscow, Idaho. In the 13th of November, 2022, Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin were killed in their beds while 2 roommates slept downstairs, unaware. A tan leather knife sheath was left on the bed of one victim. On it, a single touch of DNA. That DNA run through genetic genealogy databases eventually traced back to Bryan Kohberger, a criminology PhD student at Washington State University. He had studied the very methods police would use to catch him. His white Hyundai Elantra appeared on cameras near the house 12 times in the weeks before the murders. His phone placed him at the scene. Prosecutors argue he stalked the house for months before choosing his night. He was arrested in Pennsylvania 6 weeks after the murders. He pleaded not guilty. His defense has fought the genetic genealogy process, argued contaminated evidence, and attempted to introduce third-party suspects. As of 2026, the case is still in pretrial hearings with the death penalty on the table. 4 families have waited over 3 years for a trial date, and a man who spent his academic career studying crime investigation sat in class, presumably knowing exactly what investigators were doing to find him. Case 10, Rex Heuermann, the Gilgo Beach architect. This one takes the longest to land because it built the slowest. Between 2007 and 2011, at least 4 women, the Gilgo 4, were found strangled and wrapped in burlap along Ocean Parkway on Long Island's Gilgo Beach. All sex workers, all targeted with precision, all discarded like objects on a stretch of highway that law enforcement knew well. For 13 years, investigators had nothing. They had theories. They had suspects who came and went. The case went cold. The Gilgo 4 faded from headlines. Rex Heuermann was an architect. He lived in Massapequa Park. He had a wife, adult children, and a successful firm with Manhattan contracts. He was, by every visible measure, a pillar of his suburban world. The break came from a pizza crust. Surveillance footage captured a man placing a food order. The crust was recovered. DNA from the crust was matched to male DNA found on tape used to bind one of the victims. Belt fibers from the burial sites matched materials found in Heuermann's possession. His wife's hair found on one victim's remains placed his home environment at the scene. He was arrested in July 2023. His trial began in 2026. Guilty pleas are being negotiated. Investigators now believe he may be connected to additional victims beyond the original 4. 13 years, he drove past those burial sites on his commute. 10 cases, 10 moments where the right question, the right door knock, or the right database search could have changed everything. Paul Caneiro's gas cans, Kouri's drawer, Maya's phone ping, Courtney's chase footage, Libby's audio, Lori's backyard, Gabby's bruises, John's blood in the snow, Bryan's sheath, Rex's pizza crust. The evidence was almost always there. The question is always the same. Who was paying attention? Drop your number below which case shook you hardest. If you made it this far, you already know you need to subscribe. Hit the bell, because the next video goes even deeper unsolved cases where the evidence exists and nobody has been charged. Not yet. This is Last Witness. We don't look away.